On behalf of the 14,200 children who have been slaughtered by the Israeli terrorist regime in the past 10 months with impunity, due to the complicity of the government of Canada, who has been supplying the Israeli regime with diplomatic cover, with political support, with economic support, with financial support, and with weapons as well. As we heard a week ago, that Canada is going to be sending $50 million worth of mortar shells to Israel to continue bombing women and children in Gaza. And this has to stop. We have to call out our politicians to sanction Israel, two-way arms embargo. We have to apply economic sanctions until this terrorist state starts abiding by international law. Now, there have been doctors who have gone to Gaza to volunteer there, and they have seen hell on earth, and they have returned to report back on that because Israel is not allowing any reporters into Gaza. There are Palestinian reporters in Gaza, and the media shuts them out. There's a media blackout on the massacres, the daily massacres that are going on in Gaza. And this has to be reported. So we are here to tell you the truth about what's going on there. We have a Dr. Ahmed Youssef from Arkansas, an American doctor who's returned, and he's here to report to you what's going on. Here he is.
Here in Chicago, a group of American doctors treated patients in Gaza gathered on Tuesday for a press conference here at the DNC inside the McCormick Place Convention Center. The press conference was organized by the Uncommitted National Movement. Among those who spoke was Dr. Ahmed Youssef, who just returned from Gaza 3 weeks ago. This is some of what he had to say.
My name is Ahmed Youssef. I'm a double board certified internal medicine pediatrics doctor focused primarily on the ICU. I come from Arkansas. I may have a hard time doing this. I went to Gaza about 3 weeks ago, came back after being there for about 3 weeks. I primarily worked in the ICU and in the emergency room in Al-Aqsa Hospital. That doesn't require military strategists to realize what they're doing. They're making Gaza unlivable. They've destroyed the water infrastructure, and so we were seeing kids die of diarrheal illness. They prevented all medical supplies in, and I can tell that by firsthand witness, not by hearsay. They refused me the medical supplies that I was able to gather over months from wonderful people in Arkansas, things like endotracheal tubes and Foley catheters, things like antibiotics and sedative medications that were denied at the border. First-hand experience. They do not allow medical supplies into children that are dying. And when we got to the hospital, everything I saw on TikTok and Instagram and all the Telegram, all the stuff that we had from alternative media, because you can't be there, it was 100 times worse than I could have ever imagined. I have no ties to Gaza. I'm not from there. I have no blood there. But those people treated me better than I deserved as a member of the international community. With no food, they tried to feed me, and they'll tell you the same. With no food, they tried to feed me. And when I asked them what we could do, because there was so little we could do as doctors, they said, just make sure people know we're here. I'm going to mention the names of some of the girls that were in medical school that were with me. There was Lena, she was a 5th-year medical student. There was Raha and Rahab, they were 6th-year medical students. There was Fatin, who just graduated from medical school. These young women were displaced 4 or 5 times before I met them. They lived in tents, sometimes areas in the red zone, which means they were free target practice if they crossed the roads. And they came every day to the hospital to learn because their schools had been completely stopped. And they would take that trek every day knowing they could lose their lives, knowing that the value they present to their families as medical people could be lost because they wanted to come and help in whatever way they could. On the first day I was there in Al-Aqsa Hospital, we were in a small trauma bay in the ER. And when the first mass casualty, which was one of almost one every day I was there, occurred, and we could hear the bombs in the distance, and we knew that about 45 minutes later, people would come in pieces, that children would be carried in pieces by their loved ones on donkey carts and in ambulances, 4 or 5 in one ambulance. There was a young woman who got laid up right next to the young boy I was treating. She was 22 or 23 years old, full body surface area burns. And she was unable to speak because she likely had inhalational injury, because the same burns that burned her skin likely burned her airway. And a woman screamed from outside the door, "Hamil, she's pregnant." And so we turned her over quickly because she had come and laid down on her belly, and somebody put an ultrasound probe on her belly, and she had a viable 18 to 20 week pregnancy. But when we did our secondary survey and tried to understand what other injuries she had a shattered tib from an explosive injury. She had burns that covered over 70% of her surface area, which is a death sentence in an environment where you can't find gauze and there isn't clean water and there aren't antibiotics. We all knew what this meant on the ground in the trauma bay the first minutes we met her. She was going to die there, and her baby would die there. And there was nothing we were going to be able to do about it because the Israeli government, the IDF, had made it impossible to care for people to the extent which they deserve. Every human being deserves the right to medical aid in that situation. She was no fighter. She was a pregnant woman who was sitting in her home when a bomb dropped on her head. And she eventually moved to the ICU. And every day she lived until she died, she was in pain. Because we didn't have the kind of medicine we needed to care for her pain. And when wound care came in America, I'd give her 2 Dilaudid before changing her wound dressings. And there I could give her nothing. And every morning when we'd round, we'd stop by her bed first. And every one of us and the Gazan medical professionals who are heroes that one day will get to be here and tell you their stories themselves, so I don't have to tell it for them. We'd all keep our mouth shut and keep the tears held back because we knew we couldn't do anything, and we knew the inevitable was coming. Until one day I walked in and the bed was empty. And her story is just one of tens of thousands. And her family mourned for her just like we would mourn for our own family members. And she and every single person in Gaza deserves the dignity and support that humanity as a whole is burdened and has an obligation to provide. I stand here and I'll conclude with this last thought, which is the reason I lose sleep and the reason we cry tears isn't sadness anymore. It's a feeling that we have no ability, despite being from the most powerful country in the world, providing the bombs that drop on these innocent people, that we have no power to stop the bleeding. And so we call for a ceasefire and a stopping of the bleeding by stopping the sales of bombs. There's no reason that the bomb that dropped on that young woman's head had to be made in America.
That was Dr.
Arms embargo now. We need to stop the flow of weapons into this terrorist state that is bombing women and children. And the story that you just heard was of a pregnant woman who was killed in Gaza. A bomb just dropped on her head for no other reason than her being a Palestinian living in Gaza. You can also support by boycotting Israeli products and companies that support Israel, such as that coffee shop over there.
Israel is facing growing condemnation.
So Starbucks supports Israel. You can maybe stop going there and going to any of the local coffee shops by giving your cents to a local business instead of one that supports the terrorist regime in Israel. You can also ask your institutions to divest from the Israeli terrorist regime. Every single person who works in Canada puts their money into the Canada Pension Plan, which is investing up to $14 billion in weapons companies and other companies that are directly complicit in the theft of land in occupied Palestine and directly complicit in the bombing of women and children in occupied Palestine. And this has to stop. Call on your CPP, call on your CRA to stop subsidizing so-called charities that are sending Canadian citizens to fight and kill women and children in Gaza. These so-called charities are sending Canadian citizens to fight and kill children in Gaza, and this has to stop. Stop paying your tax dollars. Ask them to stop paying your tax dollars so that they get sent into this terrorist regime. Onward the march.